Since making the last razorfish video, I've been contacted by some viewers saying they put salt down the hole of what they think are razorfish burrows, but never get a razorfish. One of the biggest problems when collecting razorfish is correctly identifying the burrows, which can show in different ways. And the most common advice is to look for a keyhole shape in the sand. The keyhole shape is one way of locating the burrows, but from my experience, there are ways that are far more reliable. The first thing to do is find a beach that is likely to hold razorfish beds. The best beaches are sheltered sandy beaches rather than exposed surf beaches. Sheltered beaches give the razorfish more of a chance to establish themselves in good numbers, and estuary beaches are particularly good. Surf beaches will hold razorfish, however, I find they're a bit more difficult to find. It's the time of year for me to think about collecting some razorfish to use as bait later in the year, and a few as a treat for the dinner table. So I headed down to a beach with the camera to film the different ways to find razorfish burrows. Now, the easiest way to find a razorfish burrow is to, when you're walking along the beach, your sandy beach at the low water mark or near the low water mark, is look for the squirts of water. If you see squirts of water like that one there, hopefully you pick that up on camera, then that is most definitely the top of a razorfish burrow. And all you need to do then is go to where you saw that squirt of water, put your bit of salt on the top of the burrow there. That's the reaction you'll get. Put a bit more salt down, and then it's just a patience game. Sometimes they'll come up quickly, other times they take a while to come up, and sometimes you have to walk away and then revisit the burrow, the holes that you salted. But we're in luck here because that one has come up straight away, so I'm able to take hold of that and just gently ease it out. So that's the easiest way. And while you just see a squirt there, while I'm actually kneeling here, I've got the squirts from the razorfish all around me. So again, and there's one there. Bit of salt at the top of the burrow. You get that where it burrows down. Bit more salt, and then hopefully it'll push up. I'm lucky here that the first one came up quite quickly, and this one has come up quite... oh, and it's decided to go back down again. Yep, and up it comes. And just wait till you've got enough of the shell exposed to gently ease it out. Like I said in the first video, you mustn't be too hard. If you just pull this, you're going to pull the leg off, so you've just got to gently ease it out. So another squirt there. So that's the easiest way. And if you go to a beach that you've never been to before, and you've not been told that there's razor clams, razorfish there, that's a sure way of knowing. Pick a big spring tide, just walk along, gently walk along, and look for those squirts of water. Then you definitely know, rather than trying to identify what is a hole and what isn't a hole. You definitely know there's razorfish. A, there's razorfish on that beach, and B, that it's definitely a razorfish burrow. And up it comes. Right, so what we'll do now is we'll try and look at other ways, rather than that squirting water, other ways of identifying the burrows. Another thing to look for when you're trying to find razorfish burrows is when you see this dimple shape in the sand. Now, what you need to do is just salt all of those that you see. Now, when you see it like this, you sometimes don't get the razorfish to come up straight away. So what I tend to do is salt them, and then come back revisit the areas that I've salted later. Give that salt a chance to work its way down the burrow. You can use a bit of salt water to wash the salt down into the burrow. But when I see those, I just tend to put rather than stand there waiting, because sometimes it can be quite a while before the razor clam will come up, you just go along the beach and salt them, and then you get a case like that where one squirts water, and then of course salt that as well, similar to what we looked at earlier. And often the ones where you've seen them squirt water will come up quite quickly. Here's an example of what happens when you salt those dimple shapes and then you go away. If you can't get a reaction straight away, you go away, leave it and come back. Well, this often is what happens. You can see the hole there what I previously salted, and you often get this, that the razor clam will just throw itself completely out of its burrow. So it always pays to revisit holes that you salted. If you don't get a reaction straight away, it doesn't mean to say that the razor clam is not going to come up. I mean, sometimes you can't get them to come up using the salting method, but often you get this, they just throw themselves out their burrow. So always revisit holes that you've previously salted. Okay, we've had a look at looking for the squirts of water coming out of the sand, and we looked at the dimple shape. Now another thing to look for is a bump in the sand, where you get a little bump like that, and what that is that's the razor clam has just pushed its top of its shell just out through the surface of the sand. Sometimes you can actually just see the top of the shell, other times you can't, you just see a bump. But again, if you ever see that, little bumps in the sand like that, and then I've got to see the reaction I got straight away there, and then what the razor clam will do, it will try and burrow itself down. So if you just wash the bit of salt down into the burrow, and when you see the bump like that, you usually, not always, you usually get a bit of a reaction fairly quickly, as I'm getting now, and they usually come up quite quick. When you get of course, the problem with doing this and trying to make this video, normally I would do this really quietly, but it's what it is, because I'm moving a bit making this video. It's burrowing back down again, so usually you don't need to put that much salt, but as long as I've got enough shell to grab hold of, which I have just about there, don't try and grab hold of them unless you've got a decent amount of shell to grab hold of. Otherwise you're not going to hold them, they'll just quickly burrow back down again. Now this one's holding really tight, and what I've got to do is not pull it, I've just got to keep the pressure on and gently ease this out, be patient, and then ease it out. Okay, so there's three ways. So we got the squirting as you walk along the beach, that's the easiest way. The next way is the dimple shape, sometimes with a little hole or even a slit at its base. That's another way, but they usually don't come up very quickly when you get that, or the bump in the sand. When you see that, the squirting and the bump in the sand, you usually get them to come up quite quickly, as I did that one. Now earlier I spoke about that bump in the sand, and here we've got another example here. Just a little bump coming out of the sand, and on this one I can just about see the top of the razorfish shell. So what usually happens, you salt that and it usually dives down, and then you get the squirt like that with it trying to, and then you just need to put a bit more salt down there, try wash it down, get it down the burrow. And usually, when you see that bump, and the razor, you know the razor clam is very, very close to the surface, you normally get a quick reaction, like I'm getting there. And as long as you've got enough shell to grab hold, just grab hold and just gently ease it out. So that's just looking for that bump in the sand, which is just the top of the razorfish shell there, just pushing up, and then you know that is likely to be fairly close to the surface. And like I say, you usually get a quick reaction then when you pop the salt on it. Whereas with the dimple shape, you don't normally get a quick reaction. It may be that the razor clam is quite deep, whereas with this and with the squirting, you know that they're fairly close to the surface. What we're going to try and do here is show you the keyhole shape that everyone speaks about. And if you can just see there, we've got the razor clam. You can actually just see it, that it's pushed its way out from the sand, and we're on quite a high part of the beach here, so it's fairly dry. Now the keyhole shape is not the most reliable way to try and find the razorfish burrows, because what often happens, you get the keyhole shape when it's pushed its way up through the sand like this, and then it dives back down. But usually when it dives back down, it squirts water, and then the keyhole shape fills with water, and you get the dimple shape. Or if you're closer to the low water mark, it's wet anyway, and it tends to fill with water. But what I'm going to try and do here is briefly show you that shape from this razor shell that's exposed itself. So we're just going to touch around the shell, and hopefully what it will do, as we disturbed it, it will dive. Okay, so that's the shape that people talk about. But watch what happens. It quickly fills with water. So you briefly saw that slit, or what they call the keyhole shape. But then, because the razor clam has squirted, it then fills with water, and then you get the dimple shape that I talked about earlier. So the keyhole shape, looking for a keyhole shape, is not the best way to try and find a razorfish burrow. Here's another good opportunity for me to show you how the shapes are formed, which people talk about when they try and show finding razorfish, collecting razorfish and finding the burrows. Once again, we've got a razorfish that's exposed, pushed its way through the sand there. You can clearly see the top of the shell, and that's the keyhole shape, the slit shape that it will make when it dives back down again. So what I'm going to do is, just to show you that again, to understand these shapes, if I just disturb it, what it'll do is squirted water to propel itself back down. We briefly saw the keyhole shape, or the slit shape, the same as the top of the shell that people talk about, but then the problem is that then it gets quickly filled with water, and you don't really see the keyhole shape. You sort of see more of the dimple shape. So another good example there of how the shapes in the sand, the things to look for in the sand, and how they're formed. Well, I hope you found that useful, and for those of you that are struggling to find razorfish burrows, that clarifies ways you can identify the burrows. But like I said earlier, try and find a sheltered beach, a sheltered sandy beach, rather than an exposed surf beach. Much more likely you'll find razorfish, particularly a beach on an estuary, which is very, very sheltered. And also, go on a very big spring tide. Don't waste your time on small tides, or even small spring tides. Big spring tides, more likely to expose the razorfish beds. And look for those signs. The most easiest way, as I said earlier, is look for those squirts. If you see those squirts, you're guaranteed that there's razorfish there. Go to where you saw the water squirt out, and put the salt down, and usually you get a reaction pretty quickly. The second way I recommend is look for those bumps in the sand where the razorfish shell is just pushing up through the sand. Put your salt on the bump, and then usually the razorfish will dive down, put a bit more salt in the hole that's exposed, that that it leaves behind, and just push it in, wash it in, and you should get a reaction pretty quickly. And the next way are those dimple shapes, and they're caused by the razor clam has pushed up through the sand and dived back down again, and it's filled up with water, creating that dimple shape. But with those, salt them. You don't normally get a reaction straight away. Salt them and then leave them, and then come back, retrace your steps of holes that you salted, and often you'll find that the razor clam has thrown itself out of its burrow, or at least exposed itself enough to grab hold. And lastly, the one that people mainly say is probably the last one I would recommend to look for, and that is the keyhole shape. But very often it's just a slit shape where the razorfish has pushed itself up through the sand and dived back down again, or it's squirted water, and then you get the slit, or the keyhole, the slit shape and the keyhole shape. But very often that doesn't last very long. The water fills it, and then you're more likely to get the dimple shape. So once again, hope you found that useful, and many thanks for watching.